Hey guys, Christian here. Welcome back for another one. So we've got a question that stuffs up a lot of students today. We've got a maximal domain and range question of a fairly peculiar function. It's the square root of x squared minus 81. Now the reason this question stuffs up so many people is because of the fact that we're dealing with a square root function, but also the quadratic on the inside can cause some problems. So typically speaking, we always start with domain because it's generally the easier to find, and it has very specific rules. For example, in this case, the rule that we need to think about is the fact that we cannot take the square root of a negative number. We're physically not allowed to when we're dealing with real numbers, which is what we deal with exclusively in methods. So to tackle a question like this, what we basically have to do is find what values of x will allow this to be positive. What values of x will allow x squared minus 81 to be positive? Because we know from our understanding that x squared minus 81 must always be greater than or equal to 0 because we're dealing with a square root function. We can take the square root of 0, just not the square root of negative numbers. Now, the trick here is that most people forget half of the solutions. Typically speaking, what you could do is you could go x squared is greater than or equal to 81, and therefore x is greater than or equal to 9, right? See, the problem here is that the square root of if x squared is 81, then x could be 9 or it could be negative 9, and that's where the confusion sets in. So typically with quadratics, when you have this problem, you have to take the plus or minus, but with inequality, there's an added twist. The positive version stays the same, but the negative version, or x is less than negative 9. The negative version will actually make the inequality flip. It's part of that same rule that says when you multiply or divide by a negative number, you've got to flip the sign. Well, when you're dealing with a plus-minus sign, the plus part has the regular sign and the minus part has the reversed symbol. So x can either be greater than 9 or less than negative 9. Now, when you think about this, this kind of makes sense, right? If x was, for example, 10, which is bigger than 9, then x squared would be 100. 100 minus 81 is positive. Or, on the reverse side, if x was negative 10, then x squared would still be 100. So negative numbers that are bigger in magnitude than negative 9, so by that I mean further down the number line, will also provide a value that we can work with. So right here is your domain, and the most common question is forgetting this second part. That's the most common mistake that students can make. Now we've got domain, we just need to think about the range. So the range is a result of the overall expression. It's basically what the function can output. So this particular function, basically speaking, if x gets big enough, then the portion inside the square root could be anything we want, right? If x is a million, then once we square it, we get even bigger, and then when you minus 81, it's still pretty big, but theoretically you can get as big as you want. You can do the same thing in both directions, but you can't go below a specific value. Now, square root functions, as well as not being able to square root a negative number, they physically cannot output a negative number. So our range, very simply, is going to be that the square root function can put out anything above 0. It can put out 0. If x, for example, was exactly equal to 9, then we'd have x squared equals 81. 81 minus 81 is 0. Square root of 0 is 0. So it can output 0, but it can't output anything lower. Going up, however, our numbers can get as big as we want, provided we make the x value as big as we need. But however, our only restriction on x is that it has to be greater than 9. That means anything bigger than 9 will work, so we can make x as big as we want, which means we can get the range up as high as we want. So very simply speaking, we've got two different notations here, and that's just to demonstrate the different types of notations. The domain can either be written in this format, or it could be written as an interval. So we'd say that x was between negative infinity and negative 9, as well as greater than 9 to positive infinity. This is just an alternate way of writing the range. This, on the other hand, we could also just say that y is greater than or equal to 0. So I've shown both types of notation for domain and range. Now, it'll just depend on which type of notation your teacher wants. The test is asking for, it might have given you a specific format in the question. You need to be at least comfortable with all types of notation when you're dealing with intervals. Alright, that's it for this relatively straightforward, yet surprisingly complicated question if you don't understand what you're looking for. Remember, when you're dealing with square roots, you cannot take the square root of a negative number, and the square root function can never output a negative value. That's it for this one. I'll see you on the next one, guys.